The security alarm shattered the stillness at exactly 5 in the morning. One sharp tone that cut through the mountain air, followed by the buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. I didn't jump. I didn't panic. I simply opened my eyes and stared at the wooden beams above me, watching the faint glow of dawn filter through the window. The phone buzzed again. I reached for it slowly, my fingers wrapping around the cool glass as I brought it to my ear. Mike, the security guard I'd hired 3 weeks ago. His voice was shaky. Mrs. Harland, I'm so sorry to wake you, but your daughter-in-law just pulled up to the gate. She's got a moving truck with her. 3 men, she's saying. She claims she owns the property now. I let the words settle for a moment, feeling their weight without giving them any power. My tea sat cold on the bedside table, untouched since midnight. Let her in, I said, my voice steady and quiet. Mike hesitated. But ma'am, she's got paperwork. Waving documents. Telling me you don't live here anymore. Should I call the police? No, I replied. Let her in. Mike, make sure she signs the visitor log. Full name, time of arrival, everything. I could hear his confusion, the hesitation in his breathing. Are you sure? I'm sure. I ended the call. Outside, the low rumble of a truck engine echoed up the driveway. Tires on gravel, doors slamming. Then her voice, sharp, confident, Melissa. I sat up slowly, pulling my robe around my shoulders, tying it at the waist. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks now. It was a strategy born from a lifetime of careful observation. I stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the driveway below. The moving truck was parked at an angle, blocking the path to the garden shed. 3 men in work jackets stood near the back, looking uncomfortable. And there she was, Melissa, wrapped in a long wool coat, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her face lit by the glow of her phone screen as she tapped furiously at the keys. She looked victorious, radiant, as if she'd already won a battle I hadn't even known was being waged. I watched her gesture toward the front door, pointing and giving instructions to the movers like she was directing a stage production. One of the men nodded, grabbed a dolly from the truck, and started toward the porch. She thought this was her house now. She thought I'd be gone, confused, powerless. She thought she'd outmaneuvered me, an old woman easily dismissed. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the mirror above my dresser. My reflection stared back at me, calm and unbothered. Gray hair still pinned neatly from the night before, eyes clear. No tears, no fear, just patience. I picked up my tablet from the desk and unlocked it, pulling up the security camera feed. 6 different angles. Living room, kitchen, front porch, driveway. Every corner of this property was being recorded, time-stamped, saved. And she had no idea. I watched her step up onto the porch, her heels clicking against the wood. She knocked twice, hard, demanding. I didn't answer. She knocked again, louder this time, and I heard her voice muffled through the door. I know you're in there. Open up. This is my property now. I smiled faintly, setting the tablet down and picking up my cold tea. I took a slow sip, savoring the bitterness, the quiet power of knowing exactly what was about to happen. Melissa had no idea what I'd done yesterday, but she was about to find out. I need to take you back. Back to a time when my mornings were simple, when the only sound waking me was birdsong instead of alarm bells. 4 months before that knock at my door, life looked entirely different. I had just retired from teaching biology at a high school in Denver, 30 years of educating teenagers about cellular respiration, photosynthesis, and the delicate balance of ecosystems. 30 years of watching young minds bloom, stumble, and eventually find their way. When I finally turned in my keys and packed up my classroom, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. The cabin had been mine for over a decade, a refuge I'd purchased with money saved carefully over the years. It sat tucked into the Colorado mountains, surrounded by pines and wildflowers, with a view that stretched across valleys and peaks that turned gold under the setting sun. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with windows that let in enough light to grow herbs on the sill, and a living room with a stone fireplace I'd learned to tend myself. The kind of place where you could hear the wood creak when the temperature dropped and smell rain coming an hour before it arrived. I filled my days with quiet routines. Mornings began with tea on the back porch, watching mist rise off the trees. Afternoons were spent in the garden, coaxing tomatoes and basil to grow despite the altitude. Evenings, I read by the fire or worked on quilts I donated to a shelter in town. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. There's a difference. Solitude, I'd learned, was a gift. It gave me space to think clearly, to move through my home without negotiating, to make decisions without compromise. After decades of managing classrooms full of energy and noise, the stillness felt earned. But I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments when the silence pressed a little too close. Nights when I wished I could share a meal with someone, hear laughter that wasn't just my own echoing off the walls. That's when I'd call Daniel, my son, my only child. Daniel had always been sweet-natured, the kind of boy who brought home injured birds and insisted we nurse them back to health. As a man, he carried that same gentleness. He worked in tech consulting, spent his weekends hiking, and called me every Sunday without fail. We were close, not in the way some mothers smother their sons, but in the way 2 people respect and genuinely enjoy each other's company. He'd drive up to the cabin once a month, help me fix whatever had broken, and we'd sit by the fire talking about everything and nothing. He was proud of his independence, proud of the life he'd built, and I was proud of him. But Daniel had one flaw, one I'd noticed since he was young. He trusted too easily. He saw the best in people, sometimes to the point of ignoring the warning signs that others might catch. As his mother, I'd always worried that someone would take advantage of that kindness. I just never expected it to happen the way it did. It was late April when he called. The snow had finally melted, and I was outside planting seeds in the small raised beds I'd built near the shed. My phone rang, and I wiped the dirt from my hands before answering. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I have something to tell you. You're quitting your job and becoming a park ranger," I teased. He laughed. "Not quite, but I did meet someone." I straightened, holding the phone closer. "Someone. Her name's Melissa. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was sure. You know, but, Mom, I'm sure. She's incredible." There was a warmth in his voice I hadn't heard in years, the kind of excitement that made my chest tighten with both joy and caution. "Tell me about her," I said gently. He launched into descriptions. "She was smart," he said. "Ambitious. She worked in finance, managing portfolios for private clients. She'd grown up on the East Coast, moved to Denver for work, and loved hiking just as much as he did. They'd met at a networking event, started talking about trail recommendations, and it had grown from there. "She wants to meet you," Daniel said. I told her all about the cabin, about you. She's really excited. I smiled, though something in my chest tightened just slightly. A mother's instinct, perhaps. Or maybe just the fear that comes with knowing your child's heart is now in someone else's hands. I'd love to meet her, I said. Bring her up whenever you'd like. I'll make dinner. Really? That would be amazing. How about next weekend? Next weekend is perfect. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we hung up, I stood there in the garden, phone still in hand, staring at the mountains in the distance. I told myself I was being overprotective, that every mother worries when their child falls in love, that I should be happy for him. But somewhere deep inside, in a place I couldn't quite name, I felt the first stirring of unease. Daniel had always seen the best in people, and I had always been the one who saw what lay beneath. I went back to planting my seeds, pressing them into the soil with steady hands, whispering a quiet hope that I was wrong, that Melissa would be everything my son believed she was, that I wouldn't have to protect him from the person he was learning to love. But hope, I'd learned over the years, was not the same as certainty. And certainty was something I would need to find for myself. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures warm enough to eat outside. I spent the morning preparing, not out of nerves, but out of respect for the occasion. Meeting the woman my son loved deserved effort. I made a roast with rosemary and garlic, the kind Daniel had loved since childhood. I set the table with linen napkins I'd ironed that morning and filled a vase with wildflowers I'd picked along the trail behind the house. The cabin smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke, welcoming and warm. By the time their car pulled into the driveway, everything was ready. I stepped onto the porch, wiping my hands on my apron, and watched as Daniel climbed out of the driver's seat. He looked happy, lighter than I'd seen him in months. He waved, grinning, and moved to open the passenger door. That's when I saw her. Melissa stepped out with the kind of grace that seemed rehearsed. She was striking. I'll give her that. Tall, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. She wore a cream-colored sweater and jeans that looked expensive, the kind that fit just right without trying too hard. Her smile was wide, bright, practiced. She walked toward me with her hand extended, and I noticed her nails. Polished, immaculate. The hands of someone who didn't garden or scrub floors or do much of anything that left marks. Mrs. Harland, she said warmly, taking my hand in both of hers. It's such an honor to finally meet you. Daniel talks about you constantly. Her grip was firm, confident, but there was something about the way she held on just a fraction too long that made me aware she was measuring me, studying. Please call me Helen, I said, returning the smile. It's wonderful to meet you, too. Daniel came up beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. Mom, isn't this place amazing? I was just telling Melissa about the view from the back porch. It's stunning. Melissa agreed, her eyes already drifting past me toward the open door. Daniel wasn't exaggerating. This house is absolutely beautiful. You must feel so lucky to have a place like this. There it was. That word. Lucky. Not proud. Not grateful. Lucky? As if I'd stumbled into ownership rather than worked 3 decades to earn it. I let it pass. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Dinner's almost ready. The 3 of us moved inside, and I watched as Melissa's gaze swept across the living room. She took it all in with the focus of someone cataloging details. The stone fireplace, the bookshelves lined with novels and field guides, the wooden furniture I'd refinished myself, the framed photos of Daniel as a child, climbing trees and holding up fish he'd caught on summer trips. This is just charming, she said, her voice lilting with admiration. It feels so cozy, like something out of a magazine. She walked to the mantel and ran her fingers along the edge. pausing at a photo of Daniel and me taken years ago at the peak of a mountain trail. We were both sunburned and grinning, arms slung over each other's shoulders. "You two look so happy here," she said softly. "We were," I replied, watching her closely. She turned and smiled at me again. That same practiced warmth. "Daniel told me this property has been in your family for a while. It must be worth quite a bit now with how the market's been." I felt Daniel stiffen slightly beside her, but he said nothing. "It's worth whatever peace of mind is worth," I said evenly. "I don't think about it in those terms." Melissa nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I just meant it's such a valuable space, a real retreat from the world." Dinner was pleasant on the surface. Melissa complimented everything. The roast was perfect. The bread was divine. The wine I'd chosen paired beautifully with the meal. She asked thoughtful questions about my year's teaching, laughed at the right moments, and touched Daniel's arm with affection whenever he spoke. But I noticed things. The way her gaze would drift to corners of the room when she thought no one was watching. The way she straightened the napkin on her lap 3 times, as if she couldn't quite settle. The way she asked questions that felt just a degree too personal, wrapped in politeness. "Do you ever think about moving closer to the city?" she asked over dessert. "It must be hard being up here alone, especially in winter." "I manage just fine," I said. "I've always preferred solitude to crowds. But don't you worry about emergencies. Medical things. Daniel mentioned. You're getting to the age where those things matter." The age? There it was again. Another subtle jab dressed up as concern. A common tactic to undermine the independence of older women. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom's tougher than anyone I know. She doesn't need to worry about that stuff yet." Melissa placed her hand over his and smiled. "Of course. I'm just thinking ahead. It's what I do for work. You know, planning for futures, making sure people are protected." She turned that smile back to me. "I'd love to help you organize things, Helen, just to make sure everything's in order, for Daniel's sake. If nothing else." I set my fork down slowly, meeting her eyes. "That's kind of you, Melissa. But I've always handled my own affairs. I'm very particular about how things are done." She didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She just nodded, still smiling, and took a sip of her wine. "I understand completely." But she didn't. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened just slightly, the way her fingers drummed once against the stem of her glass. She wasn't used to being told no. After dinner, we moved to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and pink. Daniel excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Melissa and me alone for the first time. She leaned against the railing, gazing out at the view, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice quieter now, more deliberate. "Daniel's lucky to have a mother who cares so much about him." "I'm the lucky one," I said. She glanced at me, and for just a second, the warmth in her expression flickered. Something cooler slipped through, something sharper. "He deserves someone who can take care of him," she said. "Someone who can make sure he's not burdened by things he doesn't need to carry." I met her gaze steadily. "He's never been burdened by me." She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not." Daniel returned moments later, and the rest of the evening passed without incident. They left as the stars began to emerge, Daniel hugging me tightly at the door while Melissa waved from the car. I stood on the porch long after their taillights disappeared down the driveway, the night air settling cool around me. And I thought to myself quietly, a truth I couldn't ignore. This one smiles too much when she's calculating. 3 weeks after that dinner, Daniel called to tell me they'd gotten engaged. His voice was breathless with excitement, the words tumbling out faster than I could process them. A surprise proposal at a restaurant overlooking the city, a ring he'd been saving for. Her tears of joy. I congratulated him. I told him I was happy. I meant it. Mostly. But when we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, and felt the first real tug of worry settle into my chest. It wasn't that I didn't want him to be happy. It was that I'd seen something in Melissa that he hadn't. Or maybe he had seen it and chosen to ignore it, the way we all do when we're in love. The wedding happened quickly, too quickly in my opinion. But I kept that thought to myself. It was a small ceremony in Denver, tasteful and elegant, with only close family and a handful of friends. Melissa looked radiant in a simple white dress, and Daniel looked at her like she'd hung the moon. I smiled through the vows. I toasted their future. I danced with my son and told him I loved him. And when I drove back to the cabin that night, I felt the strange weight of knowing that things would never quite be the same. I was right. Within a month, the calls from Daniel became less frequent. Where he used to phone every Sunday, now it was every other week. Then once a month, his texts grew shorter, less detailed, as if someone were editing them before he hit send. When we did speak, I noticed something else. His words didn't sound like his own anymore. Mom, Melissa thinks you should consider getting a medical alert system, he said one evening, just in case something happens while you're alone up there. I paused, setting down the book I'd been reading. Something like what? You know, a fall, a health issue. She's just worried about you. I'm 62, Daniel, not 90, and I'm in excellent health. I know, but still, it wouldn't hurt to have a safety net. I bit back the urge to remind him that I'd been living independently for years without incident. Instead, I said gently, I'll think about it. But I didn't, because I knew the suggestion hadn't come from concern. It had come from Melissa. A week later, he called again. Melissa was wondering if you've thought about updating your will. She says it's important to have everything organized, especially at your age. There it was again. My age. As if I were one strong breeze away from collapse. My will is fine, I said, keeping my tone even. I updated it 2 years ago with my lawyer. Right. But Melissa says sometimes those documents need to be reviewed regularly. She works with estates all the time. If she could help. I don't need help, sweetheart. But I appreciate the thought. There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear him struggling with how to respond, caught between loyalty to me and whatever Melissa had coached him to say. Okay, he said finally. Just let me know if you change your mind. We hung up, and I sat there in the growing dusk, feeling something cold settle into my bones. This wasn't my son speaking anymore. These were her words filtered through his voice. And then she started visiting. The first time she showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, I heard the car before I saw it, the engine purring up the driveway. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a bakery box tied with string, her smile as polished as ever. Helen, I hope you don't mind. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. In the area? My cabin was 40 minutes off the main highway, down a road that led nowhere else. Of course, I said, stepping aside. Come in. She set the box on the kitchen counter and opened it to reveal pastries I hadn't asked for. Croissants. Danishes. Things dusted with sugar that would sit uneaten in my pantry. I thought we could have tea, she said, already moving toward the cupboard as if she knew where everything was kept. I watched her pour water into the kettle, open drawers, looking for spoons, touch things with a familiarity that didn't belong to her yet. "You have such a lovely setup here," she said, glancing around. "But don't you find it overwhelming maintaining a place this size on your own?" "I've managed for over a decade," I replied. "Of course, but you're not getting any younger. Daniel worries about you constantly." She said it so smoothly, with such practiced sympathy, that someone else might have believed her. But I'd spent 30 years reading teenagers. I knew when someone was performing. The visits continued. Every week or two, she'd arrive with some excuse, dropping off groceries I hadn't requested, checking on repairs I hadn't mentioned needing. Each time she'd move through my home like she was taking inventory, touching picture frames, opening cabinets, commenting on how much space I had, how much upkeep it required. It was a subtle, insidious form of data collection, aimed at establishing a narrative of my supposed decline. And then came the paperwork. It was late June when she arrived, with a leather folder tucked under her arm. She set it on the kitchen table with a gentle thud, her expression serious but kind. "Helen, I've been working on something that I think will make your life so much easier." I looked at the folder but didn't reach for it. She opened it anyway, pulling out printed documents with highlighted sections and sticky tabs marking where signatures were needed. "This is just a simple financial consolidation form," she explained. "It lets Daniel help manage your bills and property taxes, so you don't have to worry about it. Everything stays in your name. Of course, it just makes things smoother." I scanned the first page. Legal jargon, authorization clauses, lines for signatures and dates. "I don't need help managing my finances," I said quietly. Her smile tightened just slightly. "I understand, but wouldn't it be nice to have one less thing to think about? Daniel wants to make sure you're taken care of. This is just a precaution." "A precaution for what?" "Well, in case of an emergency, or if your memory starts to slip. It happens to everyone eventually." I looked up at her then, really looked at her, and saw it clearly. The calculation behind the concern, the agenda wrapped in kindness. She wasn't helping. She was positioning. "I'll need time to review this with my lawyer," I said, closing the folder and sliding it back toward her. Her jaw tightened just for a second. Then the smile returned. Softer now, more patient. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll leave it here for you." She stood, smoothing her blouse, and gathered her purse. "I'll check in next week. Let me know if you have questions." After she left, I sat at that table for a long time, staring at the folder she'd left behind. I didn't open it again. I already knew what was inside. This wasn't about making my life easier. This was about control, a systemic attempt at elder financial exploitation. And as I watched the sun sink behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, I thought to myself quietly, but with absolute certainty, she's not helping. She's inventorying. July brought heat to the mountains, the kind that made the air shimmer above the rocks and turned the wildflowers brittle by afternoon. I spent most mornings watering the garden before the sun climbed too high, watching the tomatoes ripen and the herbs grow thick and fragrant. It was during one of those mornings that I first noticed something had changed. My neighbor, Margaret, lived about half a mile down the road. We weren't close friends, but we were friendly. The kind of neighbors who waved when passing, who borrowed eggs or shared surplus vegetables when the garden produced more than one person could use. She'd always stop to chat when she drove by, always asked how I was doing, always seemed genuinely interested in the small details of my life. But that morning, when I saw her truck coming up the road, I raised my hand to wave. She looked right at me, hesitated, and then kept driving. No wave, no smile, just a quick glance, and then eyes forward, like she hadn't seen me at all. I stood there in the garden, dirt under my fingernails, and felt a strange prickle of confusion. 2 days later, I drove into town for groceries. The store was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and I'd been shopping there since I bought the cabin. The cashier, a young woman named Beth, always asked about my garden and told me about her kids. But when I approached the register that afternoon, her greeting was different. Polite, distant. She scanned my items without making eye contact, and when I tried to make conversation, she gave one-word answers and kept glancing toward the back of the store. "Is everything all right?" I asked gently. She looked up, startled. "Oh, yes, just busy today." But the store was nearly empty. I paid and left, carrying my bags to the car with a growing sense that something was off, something I couldn't name yet. It wasn't until the following week that I understood. I was at the post office mailing a package to an old teaching colleague when I overheard two women talking near the bulletin board. I didn't recognize them, but they were speaking just loud enough for their voices to carry. "I heard she's getting forgetful," one of them said. "Her daughter-in-law mentioned it when she stopped by last week. Said the poor woman forgets to lock her doors, leaves the stove on. It's sad. Really." "How old is she?" "I don't know, but old enough that she probably shouldn't be living alone anymore." I froze, the package still in my hands. They were talking about me. I turned slowly, and both women glanced over, their expressions shifting from casual gossip to awkward realization. One of them offered a tight smile before they both hurried out the door. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I just heard. Forgetful, leaving the stove on, forgetting to lock doors. None of it was true. Not a single word. But Melissa had been here, talking to people, planting stories. I drove home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. My mind racing through every conversation I'd had with neighbors, every interaction in town. How many people had she spoken to? How many had she told these lies, and why? That evening, I called Daniel. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to explain what I'd heard without sounding paranoid or defensive. "Sweetheart, I think Melissa has been saying things about me to people in town, things that aren't true." There was a pause. "What kind of things?" "That I'm forgetful, that I leave the stove on, that I shouldn't be living alone." He sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in it. "Mom, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Melissa cares about you. She's probably just expressing concern, and people are interpreting it the wrong way. Daniel, she's telling people I'm losing my memory. I'm not. I know you're not," he said. But his tone was careful, measured. The tone you use when you're trying to placate someone you think might be overreacting. "But maybe you're reading too much into this. Melissa mentioned that you seemed a little confused last time she visited." My chest tightened. "Confused about what, Doven?" "She said you couldn't remember where you'd put some documents she left for you, and that you asked her the same question twice." I sat in silence, replaying that visit in my mind. I hadn't been confused. I'd refused to sign her papers and put them away deliberately, and I hadn't asked her anything twice. She was lying to my son about me. "That didn't happen," I said quietly. "Mom, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying maybe you didn't realize it. It's not a big deal. Everyone forgets things sometimes." And there it was. The shift. He was defending her, believing her version of events over mine. "I'm not forgetting things, Daniel." "Okay, I believe you. But maybe just, I don't know. Keep an eye on it for me." We hung up shortly after, and I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Betrayal. Not the loud, explosive kind, the quiet kind. The kind that seeps in slowly and makes you question whether you're the one who's wrong. Was I being paranoid? Was I misinterpreting things? Was I, in fact, forgetting details I should remember? I spent the next few days second-guessing every action, double-checking that I'd locked the doors, writing down every conversation so I could prove to myself I wasn't losing track. But then I started noticing something else. Inconsistencies. Melissa had told Daniel I'd seemed confused about documents, but I'd never taken those documents out of the folder. So how would I have lost them? She'd told people in town I forgot to lock my doors. But my cabin had a security system that logged every time a door was opened or closed. I checked the logs. Every door had been locked. Every single time. She told the women at the post office I left the stove on, but I had an electric stove with an automatic shut-off timer. It was impossible to leave it on for more than an hour. The lies were small enough to sound believable, but specific enough that I could prove they weren't true. She wasn't making mistakes. She was building a narrative. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized what she was doing. She was laying groundwork, creating a story that painted me as incompetent, forgetful, unable to care for myself, so that when the time came, no one would question her stepping in. This was a classic, calculated maneuver in financial exploitation, often targeting vulnerable individuals. It was a Friday afternoon when I went to collect my mail and found the envelope. It was addressed to Harland Family LLC. The address listed was my cabin, but I'd never heard of Harland Family LLC. I'd never registered any company. I'd never signed anything creating one. I turned the envelope over in my hands, my pulse quickening. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I opened it carefully, pulling out the contents. Inside was a letter from a property management firm in Denver, thanking Harland Family LLC for their inquiry about estate consolidation services. My hands trembled as I read it again. Someone had created a company using my family name, using my address, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who. I walked back to the cabin slowly, the envelope clutched in my hand, my mind already turning over the implications. Melissa wasn't just spreading rumors. She was building something, a structure, a legal entity that could be used to transfer ownership, consolidate assets, take control. She was preparing to take everything, and she thought I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I stood in my kitchen, staring at that envelope, and felt something shift inside me. The doubt was gone. The second guessing, the wondering if I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining anything. She was coming for my home, and I was going to stop her. The next morning, I called Ruth Bennett. Ruth had been my lawyer for 15 years, ever since I'd purchased the cabin and needed someone to handle the property transfer. She was in her late 50s, sharp as a blade, with silver hair she kept cut short, and a no-nonsense approach to everything. She didn't waste words. She didn't sugarcoat. And she'd earned my trust by being direct, even when the truth was uncomfortable. "Helen," she answered on the second ring. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need to see you as soon as possible," I said. "Something's happening, and I need legal advice." There was a pause. Ruth knew me well enough to know I didn't panic easily. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 2. I'll be there." I drove to Denver that morning, the envelope from Harland Family LLC sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The city felt too loud after weeks in the mountains. All traffic and concrete and hurried people. I parked near Ruth's office building and took the elevator to the 4th floor where her practice occupied a small suite overlooking the street. She met me at the door, took one look at my face, and gestured toward her desk. "Sit. Tell me everything." So, I did. I started with Melissa's first visit after the wedding. The way she'd moved through my home like she was assessing it. I told Ruth about the financial consolidation paperwork, the rumors spreading through town, the way Daniel's words had started sounding like hers. And then I placed the envelope on her desk. This arrived yesterday. I said, I've never created a company. I've never signed anything about estate consolidation. But someone has. Ruth picked up the envelope, examined the letterhead, and pulled out the contents. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten as she read. Tell me about your daughter-in-law, she said, still scanning the letter. Her work, her background, everything you know. I told her what Daniel had shared, that Melissa worked in finance, managing portfolios for private clients, that she'd moved to Denver from the East Coast a few years ago, that she'd positioned herself as someone who understood estates and asset management. Ruth set the letter down and folded her hands on the desk. Helen, what you're describing is a pattern, and it's one I've seen before. What kind of pattern? She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. Family financial exploitation. It usually starts with someone gaining trust, then slowly asserting control. They spread doubt about the person's competency. They isolate them from others who might notice what's happening. And then they begin moving assets, often through legal structures that look legitimate on the surface. My stomach tightened. Like creating a company in my name. Exactly. If she can get your signature on the right documents, she can transfer ownership of your property into that company. Once it's under the LLC, she can claim she's managing it on your behalf. And if you're deemed incompetent, which is why she's been spreading those rumors, a judge might allow her to continue managing it even without your consent. I sat there, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. It wasn't just manipulation. It wasn't just gossip. It was a calculated plan to take everything I owned. Can we stop her? I asked. Ruth's expression shifted, something almost resembling a smile crossing her face. We won't stop her. We'll let her think she succeeded. I blinked. What do you mean? She leaned forward, pulling a legal pad toward her and uncapping a pen. If we confront her now, she'll retreat. She'll change tactics. She'll become more careful. But if we let her believe she's winning, she'll get overconfident. She'll make mistakes. And when she does, we'll have everything we need to prove what she's been doing. You want me to let her keep going? Not exactly. I want you to appear compliant while we build a defense she'll never see coming. We'll protect your assets in ways she won't notice. We'll document every lie, every forged signature, every illegal move. And when the time comes, we'll have a case so airtight she won't be able to talk her way out of it. I felt something stir in my chest. Not fear, not anger. Something colder, more focused. What do we need to do? Ruth started writing, her pen moving quickly across the page. First, we transfer your property into a revocable living trust. You'll be the grantor and the trustee, which means you retain complete control, but the property will no longer be in your individual name. So, any documents she tries to file claiming ownership will be meaningless. Will she know? Not if we file it correctly. We'll request a quiet title action, which seals the records. To anyone searching public databases, the property will appear to be in legal transition. It'll look like it's in limbo. That's exactly what we want her to believe. I nodded slowly, following her logic. What else? We document everything. Every conversation, every visit, every piece of paperwork she brings you. If she's forging signatures, we need originals to prove you never signed them. And I'll run a background check on this notary she used. If the stamp is fake, that's fraud. We can press charges. My hands were steady in my lap, but my mind was racing. And if she tries to force me out of my home? Ruth looked up, her eyes sharp. Then we'll have her on trespassing, attempted theft, and elder exploitation. But Helen, for this to work, you need to play along. If she brings more paperwork, don't refuse outright. Stall. Tell her you need time to think. Make her believe you're considering it. The longer she thinks she's in control, the more evidence we'll gather. I exhaled slowly, feeling the enormity of what we were planning. It wasn't just protection. It was a trap. One Melissa would walk into willingly because she thought I was too old, too trusting, too easy to deceive. How long will this take? I asked. A few weeks to get the trust finalized and the title sealed. After that, we wait. She'll make her move eventually. And when she does, we'll be ready. I stood, picking up my purse. Thank you. Ruth. She stood as well, extending her hand. You're not a victim. Helen. Don't let her make you feel like one. You're smarter than she is. You've just been playing defense. Now, we go on offense. I shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, and nodded. As I walked back to my car, the city noise fading into the background, I felt something settle into place. A decision. A resolve. Melissa thought she was playing a game I didn't understand. She thought I was a lonely old woman clinging to a house I couldn't manage. Too proud to accept help. Too confused to see what was happening. She was wrong. I understood exactly what she was doing, and I was going to let her think she'd won. Right up until the moment she realized she'd lost. I drove back to the mountains as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, evidence of her intentions. But now it felt different. Not threatening, just proof. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the plan was already forming in my mind. Let her think she's winning. And when she finally made her move, I'd be ready. The first step happened quietly, the way all effective plans do. 2 days after my meeting with Ruth, a courier arrived at her office with documents I'd signed the evening before. The trust paperwork was thorough, written in language that left no room for interpretation. It named me as both grantor and trustee, which meant I maintained complete authority over the property while removing it from individual ownership. Ruth filed the documents with the county recorder's office that same afternoon, along with a request for a quiet title action. The request cited privacy concerns and ongoing estate planning as reasons for sealing the records temporarily. Within 48 hours, the filing was approved. To anyone searching public databases now, my cabin would appear to be caught in legal limbo. The ownership wouldn't show under my name anymore, but it wouldn't show under anyone else's either. It would simply look unresolved. Pending. Exactly what we wanted Melissa to see. Ruth called me that Friday to confirm everything had gone through. The property is protected, she said. Any documents she tries to file claiming ownership will be rejected. And if she somehow gets them recorded, they'll be void. The trust supersedes everything. What if she questions why the records changed? She won't see the trust filing. It's sealed. All she'll see is that the property status looks uncertain. She'll probably think you're in the middle of transferring it or that there's some bureaucratic delay. It'll make her push harder, which is what we want. I felt a small flicker of satisfaction. What's next? Now we wait for her to make another move. And we document everything. Do you have a way to record conversations if she visits? I paused, thinking. Not yet. Get one. Audio, video, if possible. Colorado is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record any conversation you're part of. If she brings forged documents or makes threats, we need proof. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, thinking through logistics. I wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but I wasn't helpless either. I'd managed classroom technology for years, setting up projectors and interactive boards. When the school district finally dragged itself into the 21st century, cameras couldn't be that different. I drove into town the next morning and found a small electronics store tucked between a coffee shop and a hardware supplier. The young man behind the counter looked barely out of high school. But when I explained what I needed, he perked up immediately. "You want security cameras like for inside your house?" "Discreet ones," I said. "Nothing obvious. I need to monitor a few rooms without anyone noticing." He didn't ask why, just nodded and led me to a shelf stocked with small devices that looked more like smoke detectors than cameras. "These are wireless," he explained, holding up a compact unit about the size of a deck of cards. "They connect to your Wi-Fi and stream directly to an app on your phone or tablet. You can watch live or review footage later. They've got motion activation, night vision, and audio recording. How many would I need for 3 rooms? Depends on the layout, but probably 4 or 5 to cover all the angles. You want to make sure you get faces and voices clearly. I bought 6. Better to have extra coverage than miss something important." He helped me set them up that afternoon, showing me how to position them for the best view and how to access the app. By evening, I had cameras installed in the living room, kitchen, front porch, and hallway. One faced the mantel where Melissa always lingered. Another captured the kitchen table where she'd laid out her paperwork. The porch camera covered the front door and driveway. I tested them from my tablet, watching the feeds switch between rooms. The quality was better than I'd expected. Clear enough to read expressions, sharp enough to catch words. I felt like a student again, learning something new. Except this time the stakes were far more personal than any biology exam. Over the next week, I prepared in other ways. Small things, methodical things. I made copies of every document Melissa had ever brought to my house, including the ones I'd refused to sign. I photographed the forged signatures on the papers I'd found, comparing them to my real signature. The differences were subtle, but present. The slant was wrong, the pressure uneven. Ruth had mentioned running a background check on the notary, whose stamp appeared on the forged documents. I sent her photos of the seal, and she promised to follow up. I also started keeping a journal. Not a diary exactly, but a log. Every time Melissa visited, I wrote down the date, time, and what was said. Every time Daniel called with one of her suggestions, I recorded it. Every rumor I heard in town, I noted. Patterns emerged when you wrote things down. Details you might otherwise forget became evidence. One evening, as I sat reviewing my notes, I realized how much I'd learned from 30 years of teaching: patience, observation, the ability to see through performances. Teenagers were experts at manipulation, at testing boundaries, at saying one thing while meaning another. Melissa wasn't that different. She was just older and more polished. But I dealt with hundreds of kids who thought they were smarter than me, who thought they could cheat on a test without getting caught or skip class without consequences. They'd all learned eventually that I noticed everything. Melissa was about to learn the same lesson. By mid-August, everything was in place. The trust was filed and sealed. The cameras were recording. My documentation was thorough. Now I just needed her to act. I didn't have to wait long. She called on a Thursday morning, her voice bright and insistent. "Helen, I'm coming by tomorrow. There are some new forms we need to finalize. Daniel's really hoping you'll cooperate this time. He's worried about you." I kept my tone light, almost distracted. "Tomorrow? I suppose that's fine." What time? Around 10. I'll bring everything you need. It'll only take a few minutes. After we hung up, I texted Ruth. She's coming tomorrow, bringing more paperwork. Ruth's reply was immediate. Perfect. Let her talk. Record everything. Don't sign anything. I spent that evening tidying the cabin. Not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I checked the camera angles twice. I made sure my tablet was fully charged. I set out tea and cookies. The kind of hospitable touches that would make Melissa think I was being agreeable. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling beams, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A part of me still couldn't believe it had come to this. That my son's wife, someone who was supposed to be family, was actively trying to steal from me. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades watching people reveal themselves through small actions, wasn't surprised at all. Melissa had shown me who she was from the very first visit. I just needed time to see it clearly. I reached over and turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle around me. And I whispered into the quiet, not to anyone in particular, just to the universe, or maybe to myself. You've overplayed your hand, Melissa. Tomorrow, she'd walk into my home thinking she held all the power. She had no idea I'd already taken it back. Melissa arrived exactly at 10, stepping out of her car with a briefcase that looked expensive and unnecessary. She wore a cream blazer and dark pants. Her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail that made her look more like she was attending a board meeting than visiting family. I watched her approach through the kitchen window, then opened the door before she could knock. "Good morning," I said, smiling warmly. "Come in. I just put the kettle on." She hesitated for the briefest moment, as if surprised by my cheerfulness, then returned the smile. "Thank you, Helen. You're always so welcoming." We settled at the kitchen table, the same place she'd presented documents before. I poured tea into delicate cups, offered cookies from a plate I'd arranged that morning, and let her lead the conversation. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers clipped together, each one marked with colored tabs indicating where signatures were required. "I know we've talked about this before," she began, her tone gentle and patient, like she was speaking to a child. "But I really think this is the best option for you. It simplifies everything. You won't have to worry about bills or property taxes or any of the administrative headaches that come with owning a home." I picked up the first page, scanning it slowly. The language was dense, filled with legal terms that would intimidate most people. Transfer of asset management, irrevocable authorization, and power of attorney for financial decisions. These weren't benign administrative forms. They were instruments of total control. "What exactly does this do?" I asked, keeping my voice uncertain. "It just gives Daniel and me the ability to help you," she said smoothly. "Everything stays in your name. Of course, we're just managing the day-to-day details so you don't have to." I looked up at her, letting my expression show doubt mixed with fatigue. "I don't know, Melissa. This feels like a lot. I understand it's overwhelming, but trust me, Helen, this is what's best. Daniel wants you to be taken care of. He worries about you constantly." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but it felt more like pressure. "You trust Daniel, don't you?" "Of course I do." "Then trust that he's looking out for you." "We both are." I let the silence sit for a moment, then sighed, as if surrendering. "Can I think about it just for a day or two?" Her jaw tightened, but she kept smiling. "Of course. But Helen, time is a factor here. The longer we wait, the more complicated things get, especially if something were to happen to you." "Something like what?" An accident. A health crisis. At your age, these things can happen suddenly. If we don't have these documents in place, Daniel won't be able to help you. Everything could get tied up in courts and legal processes. I've seen it happen to other families. It's heartbreaking. I looked down at the papers again, then back at her. Can I keep these? I'd like to read through them more carefully. She hesitated, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. If she said no, it would seem controlling. If she said yes, she risked me showing them to someone who might explain what they actually meant. Of course, she said finally. Take all the time you need, but please don't wait too long. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and gathered her briefcase. I walked her to the door, thanked her for coming, and watched as she drove away. The moment her car disappeared down the driveway, I locked the door and returned to the kitchen. I checked the tablet to confirm the cameras had captured everything. They had her voice, her words, the documents she'd left behind. I spent the next hour photographing every page from multiple angles, then scanning them into digital files I sent to Ruth. Her response came within 20 minutes. These are bad. Helen, really bad. Do not sign anything. I'm reviewing them now. That evening, Ruth called. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. Those documents are designed to strip you of all financial autonomy. If you sign them, she'll have complete control over your assets. She could sell your property, empty your accounts, and you'd have no legal recourse to stop her. But she said everything would stay in my name. That's a lie. Buried in the fine print is language that transfers ownership to the LLC she created. Once it's under that entity, she controls it. Not you, not Daniel, her. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of how close I'd come to losing everything. What do I do now? Wait. Don't confront her. Don't tell her you know. Just keep stalling. Tell her you need more time. Meanwhile, I'll keep building the case. 3 days later, something arrived in the mail that made my blood run cold. It was another letter from the property management firm. This one is addressed directly to me. Inside was a welcome packet thanking me for enrolling in their estate services and confirming that ownership documents had been received and filed. I called Ruth immediately. I never signed anything, I said, my voice shaking. But they're saying they have my signature? Scan it and send it to me right now. I did, my hands trembling as I photographed the attached form. At the bottom was my signature. Except it wasn't. The loops were wrong. The spacing was off. It was close, but not exact. Ruth called back within the hour. She forged it. And look at the notary seal. See that registration number? I ran it. That notary doesn't exist. The stamp is fake. I stared at the document, feeling something cold settle into my chest. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was fraud. Criminal fraud. What do? We document it. We keep the original, and we wait for her to use it. When she does, we'll have everything we need to press charges. That night, I stood on my porch in the darkness, looking out at the mountains, barely visible against the sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I'd spent my entire adult life teaching students to think critically, to question what they were told, to look for evidence before concluding. Now, I was using those same skills to protect myself from someone who thought I was too old and too trusting to fight back. I went inside, pulled a stepladder from the closet, and carried it to the front porch. I had one more camera left, still in its box. I climbed the ladder carefully, positioned the camera above the porch light where it had a clear view of anyone approaching the door, and secured it in place. Then I climbed down, folded the ladder, and went back inside. If Melissa came back, and I knew she would, every step she took would be recorded. Every word, every action, every lie. And when the time came, there would be no room for doubt about what she'd done. I called Daniel the following Tuesday. My voice was casual, unhurried, as if I'd just thought of the idea that morning. Sweetheart, I'm thinking of spending a few days with Barbara. You remember her, don't you? We taught together for years. She has that ranch outside Boulder. That sounds nice. Mom, Daniel said. When are you going? Tomorrow. Probably. Just for 3 or 4 days. I need a change of scenery. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him relaying the information to someone in the background. Then his voice returned. That's great. You should get out more. Do you need help with anything before you go? No. I'm fine. I'll call you when I get back. Okay. Have fun. We hung up, and I sat there staring at the phone, knowing exactly what would happen next. Within an hour, Melissa would know I'd be gone, and she'd see it as an opportunity. I didn't actually go to Barbara's ranch. I'd thought about it briefly, but decided against it. If something happened while I was truly away, I'd have no way to respond quickly. Instead, I drove into town early the next morning, parked my car at a friend's house a few streets over, and walked back through the woods to my cabin. I entered through the back door, locked it behind me, and moved quietly through the rooms, pulling curtains and shades. From the outside, the house would look empty, dark, and unoccupied. Then I settled into the back bedroom, the one without a camera, and opened my tablet. The 6 camera feeds glowed on the screen, each one showing a different angle of my home: living room, kitchen, front porch, hallway. Everything was still, silent, waiting. I made myself tea, kept the lights off, and waited. The first day passed without incident. I read by the light of a small lamp, ate cold meals I'd prepared beforehand, and checked the camera feeds every hour. Nothing. The second day was the same, quiet, uneventful. But on the third day, at precisely 2 inches the afternoon, the motion sensor triggered. I looked down at the tablet and felt my pulse quicken. A car was coming up the driveway. Her car. I watched as Melissa parked near the front steps, got out, and looked around carefully. She was alone. No Daniel. No witnesses. She approached the front door and knocked twice, then waited. When no one answered, she knocked again, harder this time, and called out, "Helen, are you home?" I stayed perfectly still in the back bedroom, barely breathing, watching the screen. She tried the doorknob, locked. Then she stepped back, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I couldn't hear what she was saying from where I sat, but I could see her mouth moving, her expression shifting from casual to focused. After a moment, she ended the call and walked around to the side of the house. I switched camera views, following her movements. She peered through windows, tried the side door, and checked the garage. Then she returned to her car, opened the trunk, and pulled something out. A lockbox, small metal. My stomach tightened. She walked back to the front door, knelt, and opened the lockbox. Inside was a key. My spare key. The one I kept hidden under a false rock near the garden shed. She'd found it. Or more likely, she'd taken it weeks ago during one of her visits. I watched as she slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. She stepped inside. The living room camera captured her perfectly. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around, then closed the door behind her and moved deeper into the house. Empty, she muttered to herself. Good. Finally. She walked to the mantel, running her fingers over the framed photos like she had the first time she'd visited. But this time, there was no pretense of admiration. She picked up the picture of Daniel and me, studied it briefly, then set it face down. You've had long enough, she said quietly, her voice clear through the microphone. This is mine now. She moved into the kitchen, opening drawers, checking cabinets. She wasn't searching for anything specific. She was familiarizing herself, learning the space as if it already belonged to her. Then she pulled out her phone again and took photos. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Documentation. I realized she was preparing to list the property or show it to someone. Proof that she had access. Control. She paused at the kitchen table where I'd left a stack of mail sitting casually as if I'd walked away mid-task. She picked up an envelope, opened it, read the contents, and smiled. Still paying bills like you own the place, she said softly. Not for much longer. She spent another 20 minutes inside, moving through rooms, opening closets, and making notes on her phone. At one point, she stood in the center of the living room and looked around with an expression of satisfaction. This is going to sell for a fortune, she said to no one. And she'll never see a cent of it. Then she left, locking the door behind her and returning the key to the lockbox. She drove away as casually as she'd arrived, as if she'd just stopped by to check on an empty property she had every right to access. I sat in the back bedroom, my hands shaking, staring at the tablet screen. I had it. All of it. Her breaking in. Her claiming ownership. Her stating outright that she planned to sell my home without my knowledge. I immediately sent the footage to Ruth with a message. She just broke in. Recorded everything. Ruth's response was swift. Don't move. Don't confront her. Stay where you are. I'm contacting the sheriff's office now. I waited. The rest of that day and night passed slowly. I stayed hidden, watching the cameras, replaying the footage to make sure every angle was clear. Her face, her voice, her actions. It was all there, undeniable. I tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. Every sound made me alert. Every creak of the house settling made me check the cameras, but nothing moved. The feed stayed quiet. At 4 inches the morning, my phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting a message from Ruth. Instead, it was a motion alert from the front porch camera. I opened the app, my heart pounding, and watched as headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Not one car, two, and behind them, a moving truck. I didn't panic. I'd learned long ago that panic clouds judgment, and judgment was the only thing I had left. The security alarm had already sounded, a single sharp tone that cut through the pre-dawn stillness. My phone lit up on the nightstand, Mike's name flashing across the screen. I answered on the second ring. Mrs. Harland, I'm so sorry to wake you, he said, his voice tight with nerves. Your daughter-in-law just arrived at the gate. She's got a moving truck and 3 men with her. She's saying she owns the property now and that you're supposed to be gone. I pulled myself up in bed, tucking a pillow behind my back, and kept my voice steady. What exactly did she say? She said you transferred the property to her yesterday, that she has the deed, and you agreed to move out. She's demanding I let her through. Did you ask to see the paperwork? Yes, ma'am. She showed me something, but I don't know if it's legitimate. It looked official, but I've never seen anything like it before. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Let her in, Mike, But make sure she signs the visitor log, full name, time of arrival. Have her write down the reason for the visit. Ma'am, are you sure? If she really doesn't have permission, I should call the police. The police are already aware of the situation. I said calmly. Let her in. I'll handle it from here. Okay. If you're sure, I'm sure. I ended the call and reached for my tablet on the nightstand. The screen glowed to life, showing all 6 camera feeds. I switched to the driveway camera and watched as Mike opened the gate. The moving truck rumbled through first, followed by Melissa's sleek sedan. Behind them, a third vehicle. A man I didn't recognize climbed out and joined Melissa as she stepped onto my porch. I switched to the front porch camera and turned up the volume. She was dressed like she meant business. Dark slacks, a tailored jacket, heels that clicked against the wooden steps. Her expression was confident, almost radiant. She believed she'd won. One of the movers approached her, clipboard in hand. Ma'am, we're going to need to see some documentation before we start loading. Standard procedure. Melissa waved dismissively. I have everything. The deed was transferred yesterday. The property is mine. The previous owner is already gone. Previous owner. The words sent a cold shiver through me, but I kept watching. Do you have keys? Another mover asked. She pulled the key from her purse, the one she'd stolen weeks ago, and held it up like a trophy. Right here. Now let's get started. I want everything out by noon. They hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, but she was already unlocking the door and stepping inside. I switched to the living room feed and watched as she entered, flipping on lights without hesitation. She moved through the space like it was already hers, pointing at furniture and giving instructions. Start with the bedroom. The bed, the dresser, all of it. Then the living room. I want the couch, the chairs, everything. What about personal items? One of the men asked. Photos, books, that kind of thing. Box it all up. I'll sort through it later. Most of it's probably worthless anyway. She walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of Daniel and me, the one she'd set face down days earlier. She stared at it for a moment, her expression unreadable, then set it aside. She should have just signed the papers when I asked, she muttered. Would have been easier for everyone. One of the movers stepped into the living room, looking uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm not sure about this. If the previous owner didn't authorize this move, we could be liable. Melissa turned sharply. The previous owner signed over the property. I have the deed right here. She pulled a folder from her bag and opened it, showing him documents with official-looking seals and signatures. My forged signature. See, everything's legal now. Please get to work. The mover nodded reluctantly and headed toward the bedroom. I checked the time. 4:58 in the morning. Ruth had assured me that an officer would be patrolling this area at dawn. A routine check, she'd said. Nothing that would raise suspicion, but timed perfectly to arrive just as Melissa made her move. I switched back to the driveway camera and waited. Minutes crawled by. I watched Melissa directing the movers, pointing at items, making notes on her phone. She was meticulous, organized, and completely convinced this was going exactly as planned. At 5:14, red and blue lights appeared at the end of the driveway. I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with satisfaction. The patrol car rolled up behind the moving truck and stopped. An officer stepped out. A woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She approached the porch just as one of the movers was carrying a box toward the truck. Morning, she called out. Can I ask what's going on here? Melissa emerged from the house, her expression shifting from surprise to practiced charm. "Good morning, officer. Just moving some furniture. Nothing to worry about. This is private property," the officer said. "Do you have authorization to be here?" "I own the property," Melissa said confidently. "The deed was transferred to me yesterday. Can I see proof of that?" Melissa handed over the folder, her smile never wavering. "Everything's here, signed and notarized." The officer took the documents and scanned them slowly, her expression neutral. Then she looked up. "Ma'am, according to county records, this property is currently held in trust under a sealed court order filed 2 weeks ago. Any transfer of ownership would require approval from the trustee. Do you have that approval?" Melissa's face went pale. "That's impossible. I have the deed. She signed it over to me." "When did she sign it?" "Yesterday. She agreed to everything." The officer glanced at the documents again, then back at Melissa. "These documents show a filing date of 3 days ago, and the notary seal on this signature page doesn't match any registered notary in the state. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside and explain how you obtained these." Melissa's voice rose, panic creeping in. There must be a mistake. She's confused. She doesn't understand what she signed. I was helping her. Helping her by forging her signature. I didn't forge anything. She's an old woman. She doesn't know what she's doing anymore. Ask anyone in town. She's been forgetting things, leaving doors unlocked. I was just trying to protect her assets. The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're on private property without permission, in possession of forged documents, and directing the removal of items that don't belong to you. That's trespassing and attempted theft. At minimum, she gave me permission." "Then where is she?" Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she'd backed herself into a corner. That's when I decided it was time. I stood, pulled on my robe, tied it neatly at the waist, and walked through the house toward the front door. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, teacup in hand, as if I'd just woken from a peaceful sleep. "Good morning, Melissa," I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. The movers froze mid-step. The officer looked between us, and Melissa stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You're supposed to be gone," she whispered. "Gone where?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "This is my home. Why would I leave?" Her mouth opened and closed, no words forming. Color drained from her face as the realization settled in. She'd been caught. "Mrs. Harland," the officer said, stepping forward. "Are you the owner of this property?" "I am, and I never gave this woman permission to enter my home or remove anything from it." The officer turned back to Melissa. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for trespassing, forgery, and attempted fraud. I'm going to need you to come with me." "No," Melissa said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. She's confused. She doesn't remember signing the papers. I was trying to help. I remember everything," I said calmly, "including the fact that I never signed anything you brought me, and that you forged my signature on documents you filed without my knowledge." Melissa's eyes filled with fury. She took a step toward me, and the officer immediately moved between us. "You set me up," Melissa hissed. This whole thing was a trap. I met her gaze evenly, my voice soft but clear. "No, Melissa, you built your own trap. I just made sure someone was watching when you walked into it." The movers didn't wait for permission to leave. Within minutes, they'd loaded their equipment back into the truck, apologized profusely for the misunderstanding, and drove away. Their tires kicked up gravel as they disappeared down the driveway, leaving only Melissa, the officer, and me standing on the porch in the growing light. Melissa stood frozen, her face a mixture of shock and rage. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse, and I could see her mind racing, searching for a way out of the situation she'd created. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't prove anything. Those documents are legitimate." The officer pulled out her radio. "I'm going to need backup and someone from the fraud division. We have forged documents and an attempted property theft." "Forged?" Melissa's voice climbed higher. "I didn't forge anything. She signed them. She just doesn't remember." I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. "I remember everything. Melissa, every conversation, every document you brought, every signature you traced without my permission. And I have proof." Her eyes widened. "Proof?" I gestured toward the small camera mounted above the porch light. "This property has been under surveillance for weeks. Every visit you made, every word you said, including the one 3 days ago when you broke in using a key you stole from my garden shed." The color drained completely from her face. "You recorded me. I recorded someone entering my property without permission and claiming ownership." "Yes." Another patrol car pulled up, followed moments later by a silver sedan I recognized immediately. Ruth stepped out, carrying her briefcase, her expression calm but resolute. She approached the porch and nodded to the officer before turning to me. "Helen, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." Ruth opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. She handed it to the officer. "These are copies of the trust filing and the sealed court order protecting Mrs. Harlan's property. You'll find that any documents claiming ownership transfer are void. Additionally, we have evidence of signature forgery, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation." The officer flipped through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each one. "This is extensive. We've been building the case for weeks." Ruth said, "Mrs. Harlan suspected fraud and came to me for legal protection. Everything we've done has been by the book." Melissa turned on Ruth, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's a lonely old woman who doesn't understand what she signed. I was helping her. Daniel wanted me to help her. My son wanted no such thing," I said quietly. "You manipulated him the same way you tried to manipulate me. But he'll see the truth soon enough." Ruth pulled out another document. "This is a copy of the notary seal used on the forged signature. The registration number doesn't exist. The notary, whose name appears on the documents, denies ever meeting Mrs. Harlan or witnessing any signatures. We've already filed a report with the county prosecutor." The second officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning." Melissa's composure finally shattered. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll call my lawyer. I'll call Daniel. You're welcome to call anyone you'd like from the station," the officer said. "But right now you need to come with us." They escorted her to the patrol car, and I watched as she turned back one last time, her eyes meeting mine. The fury was still there, but underneath it was something else. Fear. The realization that she'd lost. "This is your fault," she said, her voice breaking. "You did this. You set me up." I stepped to the edge of the porch, my voice steady and clear. "I protected myself from someone who tried to steal everything I own. You built this trap. Melissa, every lie you told, every document you forged, every rumor you spread, all I did was make sure there were witnesses when you finally revealed who you really are." She opened her mouth to respond, But the officer guided her into the car. The door closed, and moments later, they drove away. The driveway fell silent, except for the sound of birds beginning their morning songs. Ruth stood beside me, watching the taillights disappear. "You did well," she said quietly. "Not everyone dares to fight back." "I'm a teacher," I replied. "I've dealt with manipulation before, just never from family." Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'll handle the legal proceedings from here. The prosecutor will likely charge her with fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. With the evidence we have, she'll face serious consequences." "What about Daniel?" Ruth's expression softened. "That's up to you, but he deserves to know the truth." I nodded, feeling the weight of what that conversation would require. Ruth left shortly after, promising to call later with updates. I went back inside, locked the door, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The cabin felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a shadow had been lifted. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the camera footage one last time, making sure everything was saved and backed up. Then I called Daniel. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Mom, it's barely 7. Is everything okay? We need to talk," I said gently. "Can you come to the cabin today?" "What's wrong?" "Just come, please. It's important." There was a pause. "Okay, I'll leave in an hour." He arrived around 10, parking in the driveway, and walking to the door with an expression of concern. I let him in, made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table. "Where's Melissa?" he asked, looking around as if expecting her to appear. "She won't be coming," I said. "Daniel, I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you to hear it without defending her. Can you do that?" His brow furrowed. "Mom, what happened?" So, I told him everything. The documents she'd forged, the lies she'd spread, the way she'd tried to steal the property, the cameras, the recordings, the police. At first, he didn't believe me. He shook his head, started to argue, insisted there had to be a mistake. But when I showed him the footage, when he heard her voice claiming the property as her own, when he saw the forged signatures side by side with my real one, his face crumbled. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Mom, I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "She fooled both of us at first, but I saw through it before it was too late." Tears filled his eyes. "I should have listened to you. When you tried to tell me something was wrong, I brushed it off. I thought you were just being overprotective. You loved her. That's not a crime. Trusting people is a good quality. She just took advantage of it. What happens now? She'll face charges, and you'll decide what comes next for you. But Daniel, you're my son. Nothing she did changes that. You're not responsible for her choices." He stayed for hours. We talked. He cried. He apologized over and over until I finally told him to stop. By the time he left, the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains. He hugged me tightly at the door, promised to call every day, and drove away with red eyes, but a straighter posture than when he'd arrived. I stood on the porch as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, watching the light paint the peaks in colors that never got old, no matter how many times I saw them. The air was cool. The mountains were still. And for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. I'd won not by being loud or aggressive or cruel. I'd won by being patient, strategic, by using the same skills I'd honed over decades of teaching, observing, and understanding human behavior. Melissa had underestimated me because of my age. She'd assumed I was weak, confused, easily manipulated. She'd been wrong about all of it. I turned and went back inside, closing the door softly behind me, and smiled to myself in the quiet of my home. 6 weeks passed before the court proceedings concluded. Melissa entered a plea agreement, admitting to forgery, attempted fraud, and trespassing in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent restraint order preventing her from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. The fake notary she'd worked with faced separate charges. The investigation revealed she'd been running a small operation, forging documents for clients willing to pay. Melissa had found her through an online forum and paid $3,000 for the falsified paperwork. Daniel filed for divorce 3 weeks after that morning on the porch. The proceedings were quiet, handled through lawyers with minimal contact. He called me once during that time, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said. "The way she isolated me from you. The way she always had an answer ready before I could even form the question. You were in love." I told him gently, "Love makes us see what we want to see. That's not weakness. It's human. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. And I forgive you. Now you need to forgive yourself." By early autumn, Daniel had moved into a new apartment closer to the mountains. We began having dinner together once a week, slowly rebuilding the closeness we'd lost during those months when Melissa controlled the narrative. He seemed lighter now, freer, like someone who'd been carrying weight they didn't know was there until it was finally lifted. As for me, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I'd been thinking about all the women like me, women who lived alone, who owned property, who had assets they'd worked their entire lives to build. Women who could be targeted by people who saw vulnerability instead of strength. So, I started volunteering at a women's resource center in town, teaching workshops on financial protection and recognizing manipulation. I called the sessions "Safeguarding Your Future," and they filled up within days of being announced. I taught them how to recognize elder exploitation, how to protect their assets through trusts, how to document everything, how to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. And every time I saw the relief in their eyes, the gratitude in their voices, I knew I'd turned something painful into something meaningful. Spring arrived early the following year. Snow melted from the roof in steady drips, and wildflowers began pushing through the thawing ground. The mountains glowed gold under the morning sun, and the air smelled clean and new. I sat on my back porch with tea, watching the mist rise off the trees, feeling the warmth of the sunrise on my face. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. He was coming for dinner that weekend and wanted to bring fresh trout he'd caught. I smiled, typing back a reply. Life had returned to what it should have been all along. Peaceful. Simple. Mine. I thought about that morning when Melissa stood on my porch, certain she'd won. The look on her face when she realized I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. People often think revenge has to be loud, dramatic, explosive. But I'd learned something different. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs the right papers.